Hello, my name's Dr. Maria Kempinska, and I am absolutely delighted to have my guest on today's program. His name is Steve Best, and he is a fantastic comedian. But during his time of perfecting the art of comedy, he actually found that he was a brilliant photographer. And having worked on the comedy circuit, as some of you know who know me, I created jongleurs and worked with all the best comedians, including Steve. He started taking photographs of comedians, and majority of comedians have never had photographs taken of themselves. You know, in the music industry, people pop along and take photographs. There were one or two people that did the occasional photograph, but nothing that created the library that Steve has. So I am delighted that Steve said yes to talking to me after all this time. And the fact is, he's still performing as an artist, as a comedian, but his photography has really excelled. And so without me going on too much, I want to just ask you, Steve, just to say welcome. And let's just start off. When did you start in comedy? When did you start performing?
It's lovely to be here, first of all. And before, I've never done anything else. It's quite strange. Never had a job, never gone for an interview. So I came out of my A levels. I was a kind of a straight A student, and then I got obsessed with magic. A friend gave me a magic set, and I just loved performing magic, juggling, kind of circus skills. So really, when I started when I was 18, 19, and then I should have gone to university, and I kind of just went on a summer circuit, this kind of in Exeter. I based myself in Exeter and just went round, Newquay, Torquay, all those places, just gigging. And then I came onto the London circuit. So a long time ago, must have been, the original question, must have been about 28, 29, 30 years ago or something.
Yeah, because Paul Martin, he was Paul Martin then, Paul Merton, gave me his original performance tape. Actually, it was a cassette that he did, and he was at university. So lots of students did come through that way. And I remember Paul handing me the cassette and said, "Oh, can I do an open spot?" So, and it's great because it does take time. Also, like Peter Kay, he started preparing to be a comedian when he was a teenager. But why magic? What did you find about it?
Well, magic it was more the kind of performing arts. I think my parents, we didn't have a TV when we were growing up, which is quite strange. And so my parents were really into comedy records, LPs. So we listened to, in an evening, rather than watching television, we were listening to the Goons and I'm Sorry I Read It Again, and some of the kind of classic kind of comedy LPs. And my mum was a very funny person. She was an artist. My dad was a kind of mathematician, and that kind of merging of things. And I've got a twin brother. We were always kind of class clowns, in the classic class clown kind of thing. And but I think something about magic really, I just loved it. I don't know what it was. I think the mystery and the performance skills and all this stuff. So I got very much into that start, and it was just coincidental that a friend had a box of magic tricks, and I took hold of them and just got obsessed. I have an obsessive nature, I think. So okay. I got obsessed with performing, and then I juggled. I used to juggle an hour before going to school, and then come back and then juggle another hour or 2 hours. So once I got into something, I wanted to do it really well. So
do you remember Steve Rawlings, the juggler?
Absolutely. I mean, he was at the Jongleurs, I think, originally. I remember originally Jongleurs, to me, I know we're going off on tangents here, but I remember Jongleurs being much more of a kind of cabaret, and not just stand-up, and that was the beauty of it. And I think some of it's kind of coming back now, but not as much as it was. I think it was such an eclectic kind of act.
You're talking about juggling, it's so good for the brain, isn't it?
I think so. I think it's good, just a little bit of an exercise as well, and coordination and all this stuff. So maybe, maybe good for the brain.
So you said that your mother loved comedy, and I think this is a misnomer that people have about women. A lot of comedians, and I've looked at, sort of including people like Robin Williams, he used to entertain his mother. And there's a lot of comedians that did have that sort of relationship with their mother, that either they were funny they enjoyed humor, or they wanted to entertain her as well and keep that humor going. And, you know, I wrote a PhD, and in that I was talking about how that aspect of the male psyche is sort of more like the peacock, but I don't mean the peacock is preening and everything, but it is a way to attract women. And a lot of women do prefer men who are funny, don't they?
Well, isn't that the classic saying of the sense of people, women like a sense of humor?
Yeah,
But
definitely.
maybe that's true. I don't know if that can be. Maybe. I mean, I think my mum was quite an interesting character actually, because she was very quite politicized as well at the time. So she was very anti-Thatcher at the time, and she was also she kind of had no. She was very carefree, so she'd you know be embarrassing for us as kids, because she would run down the street dancing or something like that, just whatever took her fancy. My dad was very straight-laced in a way. It kind of come from a much more straight-laced kind of family, so it was quite a weird connect, you know, them getting together in a way, which was lovely. So you have a very kind of a kind of mathematical person and a very arty person. So yeah, but I don't know whether I was trying to impress. I think it was my twin brother was very, very funny. He was mostly funnier off stage, and I don't think he could translate to going on stage with how funny he was in the pub, or you know, those kind of surroundings. And I'm very quiet backstage and quiet off stage as well to my friends. So I often don't get recognized because even if I'm performing, I can be on stage and come to the bar afterwards, and people won't recognize, put two and two together and think that was the person on stage, because I go a bit manic on stage. So it's kind of a therapy thing, maybe.
Yeah, no, it's an expression, you know, again, in psychological types, I did that study, and most comedians I found were introverts. So you save that moment on stage and you use it as a performance skill. But when you do perform on stage, how do you switch? Do you go step into a personality, you know, like Al Murray is the classic, isn't it? Al started off as somebody totally different when he started on the circuit, and then he found that his pub landlord really worked. Is that what you do?
Al Murray's a hugely intelligent guy, and I think a lot of comedians are very intelligent people. Not saying I am, but I think a lot of people are. And I think, I remember Al Murray at the beginning. He used to do sound effects, didn't he? I remember him doing opening boots of cars and machine guns. Not quite like Chris Luby, as you remember Chris Luby, but I think, but Al Murray, the pub, I mean, is a character, isn't it? I think he goes into a character. I mean, I was talking to Ria Lina the other day. I'm just trying to do this kind of YouTube channel and photographing comedians while I interview them. So I'm getting someone to film me. And I saw Ria yesterday, and she is Ria off stage, but Ria Lina on stage. So it's just an extension of who she is, but it is a kind of a character still. So I think when I go on stage, it's just an extension of who I am, but I think I'm a bit more carefree, and I can go a bit manic on stage. So it is the same character, but it is a different character in another way. Does that make sense?
So it's an extension of part of you.
Yes, it has to be. I think it has to come from some kind of truth. I think.
Yeah.
I think if you're just maybe just a joke teller, which I do jokes, but some of the mannerisms is very much an extension of myself. So. And I think if you just tell jokes, I don't think there's nothing of you in there. So sometimes you get a bit bored with. I mean, you enjoy the makeup of how the jokes are written and how clever they are. Sometimes you laugh at how jokes are written, but I think the really good acts are the ones that have something of themselves in there, obviously. So Al Murray, with Al Murray, maybe I don't know. The pub landlord is a character, so it might not be him in there, but he might be showing what that kind of landlord is as a character.
Yeah, or a part of, or somebody he recognized as a younger person, or that part of himself. Yeah. And it's quite interesting. So you now take photographs. You go to, obviously, do you take photographs when you're performing? And not at the same time, obviously, but when you're there, do you say, oh, can I just take a photograph of you? How did you get to that point? Because you've got some amazing names, haven't you? You know, like Omid Jalili, Alan Davis, you know, you've got John Bishop, Graham Norton, Ben Elton, but Alexei Sale, and, you know, out of all of them who are amazing performers, and I've worked with all of them, your Alexei Sale is quite a profound photograph, because you capture him at the side of the stage, and you've got that sort of darkness all around that the stage will give, and just him there in the middle, and he was one of the forerunners of stand-up comedy, wasn't he?
Absolutely. That kind of picture shows there's a similar one-ish of one of like Mike Gunn through the curtains at the Hammersmith Apollo, and there's like 3,500 people in front of him, but it's just him on his own with a light shining on him. It's quite a lonely picture, and the same with Alexis Sales one. It's quite a lonely picture in a way, and I think that it kind of slightly epitomizes what stand-up is in one sense, although it's a joyful thing to watch as a punter, as an audience member. So but someone like Alexis Sales, so I had initially I was gigging, and I had a little camera with me, and I just shot backstage because people knew me absolutely as a stand-up, not as a photographer. It's slightly changed now, especially with the newer generation of comedians. They don't know me as a stand-up, they just know me as a photographer, which is quite an interesting way of doing things now, because the whole point was that people would drop their guards, like not drop that. I didn't want them to. I didn't want to be a voyeur in a way, but I also wanted to get them to realize, to not think that I was taking pictures of them. So they were very natural backstage pictures. But initially, my first little book was Comedy Snapshot, and they were just snapshots, portraits of comedians, and then I'd ask them for a joke and 4 or 5 facts. That was the contract between us. If they answered those questions, they were in the book. And it was kind of like the Bible of the circuit in the way, the first one, Comedy Snapshot. And because that was really a cross section, people I'd worked with, people like Joe Brand, Lee Mack, people who've become ultra famous, and other people who are just starting out, or people, 1 or 2 people have passed on since then as well. And that was really a little snapshot. And then I did another one, Joker Face, which is very similar to that. So there's about 500 comedians. So in all of those 2 little books, there's about 1,000 comedians, which is, people think, oh, are there that many? But that there's thousands, isn't there, really? So.
There are, but coming back to the loneliness, it is that, and that whole question of, are comedians depressed? Everybody says that. Oh, that comedians are depressed, which we'll get onto in a minute. But the loneliness is quite a profound way of being, isn't it? Because you are exposed. There is no art form quite like the art form of stand-up comedy, is there?
No, I mean, that's in a way people think the purest of stand-up is a person and a microphone on stage. I mean, there were other people like myself and Steve Rawlings, people like that, who slightly cheated in a way because we had props and a guitar or whatever. But in essence, it's still the same. You're on your own.
Exactly.
In front of an audience, that you live or die in that moment. So yes, it is, in a way, it's a lonely thing. But I think the circuit as such, as a stand-up circuit, and I think that's changed to become even more lonely. But beforehand, at least you had clubs like Jongleurs, like the Glee Club or the Comedy Store, where you have weekends away. So you spend 3 nights somewhere, and there would be that kind of friendship between 3 acts or 4 acts just for that weekend, and you might not see them again for another year. So and I think those kind of clubs are less and less now. I mean, Jongleurs was a big part of it in one sense, because you had 16, 17 clubs around the country.
Yeah, plus theatres and cruises and all sorts. So that's another story which is quite interesting in its own right. But coming back to how you, as a personality and as a performer and a husband now and a father, how did you cope going on stage, being so exposed? How did you cope with, and all comedians, let's be very clear about this, and I want everybody who's listening to understand, all comedians fail at some point. All comedians die, as we call it, on the stage, and they can't take that too personally if they want to carry on. You've just got to keep coming back. But how did you do that? How do you deal with those moments?
That's a good question, actually, because I think that some comedians, personas, can ultimately take it differently. I mean, me personally, I'm not that thick-skinned, so I found it quite hard, actually. But as you over the years, you become more thick-skinned, and you just think, oh, that's just another gig, it's fine. It's you do pressurize yourself into kind of because ultimately you've got to do well, otherwise you wouldn't get booked back again. In the old days, you have to do a certain amount of wellness to get booked back on these clubs. So that was your living. I think people's livings, you could make a very good living out of being just a stand up on the circuit 20 odd years ago. I think it's much harder now just doing that, but we can talk about that later. But me personally, I mean, I had some times at the beginning where, you know, it didn't quite click. And again, it's very, in the first 30 seconds, if the audience, they can sense something, they don't quite sense that you're nervous, or they sense that there's something wrong, that they'll go for you. I mean, play clubs like Up the Creek is a famous one where you've got literally 30 seconds to prove your worth, whether you're funny. And sometimes you're not feeling right, or something's not working and it just doesn't click. And then it's a struggle. It's really hard. And you know, it's devastating because you're with your peers as well. They're watching you. So, you know, a lot of comedians quite revel in the idea of another comedian dying on stage, because they find it quite funny, because they know that, you know, it's kind of gallows humor in a way, isn't it? So, but personally, over the years, you would at the beginning be devastated, and it'd be very hard to come back the next day and do another gig. But now I don't put as much importance to it now. It's fine. People can love you or hate you. It's fine, you know.
I'd
But
like
Sarah,
to.
I think that Sarah Millican had a good one, didn't she? I can't remember her saying that we'll have to work it out somewhere, where she says you can only think about it until 11 o'clock or something like that night, and then it's another day or something.
Yeah, which is, you know, I think if you can be disciplined like that, but as you say, some people take things more to heart. I've known comedians who just, that's it. If they die on stage, they never come back. They've done their trial and it's too painful for them. So whatever has happened to them has happened. But coming back to that moment, so, and as I say, all comedians have gone through this. Anybody who's been on stage, you know, I did 10-minute stand-up for charity, actually, and I did it in Covent Garden, one of our clubs, and it was in front of 250 people. And what I was so pleased about doing that, it's such a different experience to what you think it's going to be.
Interesting. Okay, why? What?
Because the whole experience is almost, time is exaggerated. You're almost in a capsule, that 10 minutes becomes almost like a year. Because I was so aware of the audience every moment there. I did it within 6 weeks, by the way, but I was so conscious of what I had been viewing for the past 30 years of comedians getting up on stage and what was needed to be done. And I knew that there was going to be that sort of spotlight on me, but I knew I was doing it for charity. So to some extent, I was getting away with stuff. But I wanted, nevertheless, for myself to be good enough, you know, to trial out as an art form. But it's that, you know, what does your mind think about? How do you cope with somebody shouting out? Because when you're on stage for that 20 minutes, very often, there's a lot that goes on with the audience that you've got to assess, haven't you, when you're performing? So do you change your material around according to the audience when you're halfway through, or do you stick to your routine?
I think as throughout the years, you kind of stick. I mean, I personally do, but there's other people who are very good at kind of improvising the scene, and the whole act is about what happens in the audience. I have set pieces and set jokes, but saying that, I think you as you get better at it, you very much play around with what's going on as well. I mean, you wouldn't ignore someone getting up and walking across, or you just got to you've got to do something and say something. And within character, my character on stage, I just go for it. I don't mind anymore. I think that you learn how to assess the situation and play with the situation. But that, I think that comes with stage time. There's very few comedians, I think, who I think there's a lot of people who've got very funny bones and need to learn the profession by doing it. But there's a few people I think are more or less straight out the box, have something very innately understanding of what's funny, or you know, someone like, I remember seeing Johnny Vegas, for example, and there's just something about him and how he understands what's going on more than anybody. There's a few people like that you just think, wow, they've got something that's just. And I actually teach at Middlesex University at the moment. They do a drama course. On the third year they do the comedy module, so I help on that. Been doing that for 6-7 years, and there's just every so often there's a few people there you just think, wow, you know, they've only been doing the module for 3 months, but there's something inside them that you think that they just understand something that you can't teach in a way.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I really believe, since I did my 10 minutes, and it was a very intense 10 minutes, by the way, that you can be taught your way, or you can delve in to find your way of being funny. And with somebody like you are automatically warm, and people want to like you, and they, you give them feedback, and you're a natural entertainer like that. But as you say, some stand-ups, when they're verbal, they can put people off.
Well, absolutely. I think there are people who are fantastic writers.
Yeah.
But there's something about their manner, the way they are, that they're not great performers. And I think that I've got something that I do think that when it works, I'm a good performer, but I've been lazy, I think, over the years. And I think that's, you've got to put everything together to become very successful. You've got to constantly not worry about being rubbish, knowing that you're on a big, longer journey. I think, people like Izzard, there's this story that he was dying on his bum, a lot at the beginning, and he was finding his voice. And once he got that voice, but he didn't mind. I mean, McIntyre's another example. I remember playing jonglers with him, and he did a different set every night. I mean, he did very well every night. But the fact is that he was trying out different things, didn't worry if things failed, really. He had a bigger path. I think there were acts like myself, maybe, who had a really strong 20, 25, 30 minutes or something like that, but were a bit scared, fearful of not doing well on one night. And that's a problem, I think.
Yeah, totally. And that really can take over. And it is a fear thing, isn't it? By the time I went at the beginning, when I was asked, I was told, can you do this? Which I did. And then as I got closer to the time, I became myopic. I was like, what have I done? Why am I doing this? And it was just the most, I don't do skydiving and things like that, but that to me is not as fearful as doing something on stage. And I think, the whole process includes your performance, how you express yourself, how you want the audience to perceive you, but also coming off stage and being in the green room, as you say, other comedians. What's the worst experience you've had with other comedians?
I don't generally, but going back to the fear thing, I think they do say that isn't public speaking one of the most fear. Yeah, I mean, apart from, I think that's more number one or number two, isn't it? But I think generally the circuit has been a very friendly, kind of supportive environment. I really do. I don't know. There's a kind of a new circuit now where there's kind of a lot just open spot nights. I think in the old days, you would be a part of a professional night if you were trying out stuff. Now there are bringer gigs. There's open spot gigs just solely for that, and I think there might be a bit more competitive. I think there's always, people are competitive in their nature as stand-ups. You want to do well. You want to get to the top. But I don't remember any horrible problems backstage, because I think normally there's either people quite stressed about going on, or you've got people coming off who are quite relieved that they've come off. So there's quite a mixture of emotions going on. And that's what I try and capture. I think my favorite shots when I'm doing with the photography are those kind of mixtures. There's one really lovely, one of my first ones, and then when I realized this is quite a nice thing to do, was Michael Fabry and I can't remember his name now, but it was a gig. It will come to me, the name. It was a gig in a bowling alley up in Lincolnshire or something like that. I mean, it's a terrible idea because it only lasted a few gigs. But Michael Fabry had finished, and he's lying on the couch in the dressing room, and you could see in his face that he's just finished and he's really happy and he's smiling, and then the other guy about to go on, his head's on against the wall and looks really stressed. And I like that. There's two things going on. So there's a lot of kind of emotions going on stage. But I haven't. I mean, you must have seen. Have you seen kind of? I haven't seen any fights or anything like that, really.
No, yeah, I have seen fights, but not necessarily backstage.
Right.
You know, sort of, I think most of the comedians were sort of just nice. What about depression? Let's talk about that. You know, do you feel that in your experience, comedians are depressed and that's why they do stand-up comedy?
Not, I mean, I'm friends with people who have got a persona on stage that is quite depressed, you know, depressed. Like Mike Gunn is a good mate of mine, and you know, he used to be the funeral director, and
That's
then
right,
he changed,
yeah.
and then so, but there's people's persona on stage which is quite depressing. I suppose Jack D in a way is another example. So it's quite low status. Is it low status? No, it's quite high status, isn't it? I can't remember. Well, it is, but the fact is it doesn't unless you're matey and friends with comedians on the circuit, you don't see that side of it, because I think when you come to a gig, people are kind of either gearing up to go on stage or they're coming up. You don't see depression. Personally, I'm not I'm quite obsessive person, but I'm not a depressed person. I don't know. I had a lot of problems early on when I started, and I was asked, I went to a psychiatrist at the time, and asked, I think they have to ask if I was suicidal, because I was depressed in one sense, but it wasn't that way inclined. So
How did you know
so
you were depressed?
I started having huge anxiety attacks for a year or 2 years, and it wasn't, was it depression? I don't think it was depression. It's more anxiety and stress. It was stress, really. So depression I haven't really had. Yeah.
And how old were you and what were you doing? Were you on the circuit already?
Well, I was 22. My mum became very ill when she was very young, actually. So she was when she was 42, 43, and she was ill for 5, 6 years. And the last year she was very ill, died. But she was very young when she died, when she was 49. So that was the stage when I was practicing the guitar. So I was into the guitar then, and I was playing 6, 7, 8 hours a day. I mean, I was really obsessed with the guitar, another obsession of mine. And it was during that time my mum was she was in hospital a lot, and my brothers had left for university, or they were, and I was at home with my dad. So every day, more or less, I was going to hospital, and it sounds kind of quite selfish in one sense, but I was really suffering. My mum was obviously absolutely suffering, but so I found that really hard, and I came a lot of symptoms. I got, it was actually afterwards when she died that I had all the kind of anxiety and panic attacks, because I think my body was holding a lot of stress for so long, and I was holding it together, really holding it together. And it was when she died that you thought, I'll be better now. But in actual fact, that's when it all exploded.
All comes out because you have to keep going, don't you? And what was her illness?
She had ovarian cancer.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So
it's a long time to suffer, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the first 3 or 4 years she was going through operations and treatment and all this stuff. But it was, the last year, I mean, we were young and didn't understand. We should have done the kind of more the terminology of, no one ever said it was kind of terminal at any stage. So, so it was, and it was obvious it was, but yeah.
Do you think that would have made you feel better if you knew? Is it helpful to
know? I'm not sure. I think the problem was that I didn't see kind of any help from doctors or counselling until afterwards, and I think it would have been helpful if I'd got that during and talked about it then, I suppose. But it was kind of this kind of never talked about thing, really.
Yeah, and do you know, in many ways, Steve, it's, you're touching on something that's so profound in our society and with people, that in various cultures, they deal with death in a different way, and they talk about it, and they have this respect. At the moment, we've lost that to some extent, and people talk about the option to die and so on, but they don't talk about how to manage it, and the family how to manage it.
No, I think there was a slight problem as well, because we grew up in the Jewish tradition as well, where it's actually quite a closed society in one sense, because once someone dies, then the community does get involved.
Yeah.
And they have, they sit Shiva, and so they come round for, I think it's 7 days afterwards, to say prayers and all this stuff. But the problem with that is that I'm not religious, and although I was brought up in an Orthodox way, I had my bar mitzvah and all this stuff. I kind of lost everything then, and so if you don't accept that, then you've got nothing else. There's no other kind of support network.
But don't you think it's also because I've actually cooked for people on Shiva, because although, sort of the family was sitting in the other room, we came in to cook and then left. And it was a friend of a friend. And, I'm very respectful of that process. But is it also that people expect you to get over it? That's it. And now let's move on. But as you say, death sometimes just doesn't hit somebody immediately. It takes a while to actually make sense of this.
And I don't know if one ever can make sense of it unless you really talk about it there and then, or even afterwards. And the problem is that so yes, in the Jewish tradition, it's mostly accepted that once you've done that, then that's, and you're religious and you believe what's going on afterwards, then that's all fine, because your brain kind of, but if you don't, then you're a bit stranded, very stranded. I was, and it manifests in different ways for different people. I think my brother had terrible back problems because he's really into karate. He's very good, but he all spasmed up and all this stuff. And I don't know how my dad and my older brother, how it manifests, but me, I found it really hard. And I did go to the doctors afterwards, and they kind of okay, in the sense of, we'll give you some counseling, all this stuff. It didn't quite work, and if it didn't quite work, then that was it. You didn't go on to someone else. And I should have done, but then I went the Eastern way. I went into kind of shiatsu and acupuncture, and that really helped. And eventually come out the other end years later, where you think both things can help. So I shunned the Western side of things for a while, and just went the Eastern way, and meditation and all this stuff. But it's still, and I read very recently, that there was a case that one can have kind of PTSD in a way, because, and I don't know how, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'd like to delve into that to see, because, throughout my life afterwards, the kind of anxiety has reared its head, and I never had it before. So that must have been the catalyst, and it was buried quite deeply, and it keeps coming up every so often, I think.
Well, there is this transgenerational, I know, because my parents were prisoners of war, Polish. My uncle was murdered in Auschwitz, and everybody says, but I didn't know you were Jewish. And I said, no, we weren't. But, they were there with, Jewish inmates and, all sorts, of people, the infirmed, the ones that they wanted to get rid of. And my parents were prisoners of war. My father was in a gulag in Siberia. And they have generational PTSD. And sometimes I believe that can be triggered, especially if you are Jewish. And it doesn't matter whether your parents experienced it, but it can be generational. It comes through. And there's some great books about this. But in Israel, they deal with that. They have a center that deals with that. We don't have that so much over here, but I think you're quite right to note that. And to say that this is what can happen, that PTSD can be resurrected almost, is a memory. And the body does hold memories. And people, that psychoneurology, that neurobiology that is within us all, we go back to the mind and body being connected, which Descartes separated. The mind and body was separated as a philosophy. And now we're coming back to understanding the mind and body are connected, and things go on there. And I think what you're saying is so profound and so important for people to realize that sometimes when somebody dies in your family, it can trigger something so deep that you've got to try to resolve it. And it's not a case of getting rid of it. It's integrating it. It's making sense of it.
Well, it's kind of like, cognitive behavioral therapy in a way. You've got to train your brain to understand it and think differently, I think. I mean, I had a few CBT, CBT. Yeah, the other one's the oil, isn't it? So I think that's quite good as well. But yeah, yes, I think we don't talk about it. I mean, people do. There are people who understand it and then seek help and talk about it through, and I don't think it matters how long the gap is between that, you know, when it started. But yeah, I think that, I mean, the Eastern side of things was always connecting the mind and the body. I mean, that was the
Totally.
whole.
And I'm so pleased that that door has now been opened again.
Yeah.
You know, that where, as you said, you go to do yoga, meditation, everything, and it does work. You've got to find what works for you, and it is our journey. But you're a father now. How old are your children?
My children are, my oldest is 16, a girl 16 and a boy 14. Yes, yeah, they're great. Yeah.
And do you think about them in terms of the PTSD? Do you ever think, oh, I wonder if they're going to inherit this? Or
Well, I think I don't know whether I was a hypochondriac before my mum. I don't think I was. We had a very good upbringing and a childhood, very fun, very kind of very close family, really close family. So, and I think we have that with our kids now as well. I think they're very close. So I don't know. I think my kids are slightly. My daughter actually did go through a slight. We could have been a scary problem, a similar thing to my mum in a way, where I was. I think she was about 8 or 9, and I was playing poker with. I play poker with comedians, the Mike Gunn, Mark Mayer, Hugh Thomas, and you know, we do it once a week kind of thing. And then I had a phone, and my daughter had a pain in her arm, a bruise in her arm, and my wife is very good. She, rather than go to doctor, she went to A&E then, and I was playing poker, and I just got a phone call, said come straight away, and they basically there and then had diagnosed her with bone cancer. I mean, it's just the shock that
out of the blue.
Out of the blue, and she had a hole in her bone. And so for about 3 months, we were under the idea that she was going to have chemotherapy and all the stuff that goes with it. And I mean, and then when they did the biopsy, they found it was a benign thing. It was called this. They don't quite know what it was actually. It's like a giant cell tumor, which sounds very scary. But it was benign, and so they had to clean it out. And she had a hole in her bone, so they had to kind of put it in a cast. But it that kind of brought back. I mean, it was horrendous. I was walking around the streets crying.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So I think about it now. Yeah. But,
yeah, it's so profound when it's your children. But tell me about your wife, because she's not English, is she?
No. So she came from the former Yugoslavia. So she was born in Bosnia, which it was in Zenica in Bosnia. But her mum is a Bosnian Croat. It's very complicated.
I know it is. I know.
But, I mean,
that's my part of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So her mum was kind of Croatian, Bosnian Croat, and her dad was Montenegrin, which is kind of Orthodox. So, but she came over as a refugee, during the war actually. But she was studying in Serbia, so she was studying in Novi Sad in Serbia. It's very complicated. Her brother was one of the last people to come out of Sarajevo on a bus, on a kind of bullet-ridden bus coming out of Sarajevo. So she came over as an asylum seeker, but she was doing an English degree in Novi Sad there. She did 3 out of 4 years there, so she came over without completing it. I mean, she's a very clever. I mean, she's an amazing person. So she came over and went to Greenwich, and then she did an undergrad in psychology at Greenwich University. Then she did a master's in linguistics. So she changed linguistics at UCL. Then she did a PhD at UCL. Then she did a postdoc at MIT in Boston, which is MIT is one of the best places.
Yes, we know. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, so she's done very well. Now she's at the moment. Now she's an associate professor in linguistics at UCL. So she's kind of an academic. Yeah.
And how did you cope during that time when that shock happened? You know, you take that phone call, you rush down to the hospital. How did you both get through it? Because both of you have been through, your wife in all that trauma. You've got a son to deal with. How do you cope at that moment?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think you do. You just cope. I don't know what the mechanisms of the body and the mind. It does go into. I know it did kind of. you do. Maybe I was thinking back to when I was younger with my mum, I suppose, just thinking, we've got to get through this kind of thing. But you don't know what would happen afterwards. Again, the build up all this stress in your body, what would happen if something happened, which, if we came out the other end, it's great, it's fine. Although she had a scare recently, literally 2 weeks ago. So, but we went to the same thing. She had the pain there, and we had we're having an MRI, but we had an X-ray, and it's all fine. But it's this kind of ongoing, that's life, isn't it? It's this ongoing thing of trauma and stress that your body, I think, can deal with that. I really do think it can deal with if you've got supportive family and people around you.
That's what I mean. And that's what you've actually created, haven't you, between you?
Maybe. I don't, do you create that, or do you think there's an innate thing of some people can cope better and some people can't? I don't know if I can cope better. I think that you just get on with it, and you don't know what's going to happen afterwards. When everything relaxes, then that's when a lot of the stuff comes out. A lot of the stuff.
Yeah, you go into that ability to get through it. Did you use your humor at that time with your daughter?
I've always mucked around with my kids, and they, I'm embarrassing now. They get to, when they were younger, you're very funny, but when they're now this age, you're embarrassing to them,
Dad, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. I still muck around. I still can't take things seriously. But at that time, that precise time, I cancelled all my gigs. I just could not face the idea of going on stage and performing. I just couldn't. And that was very similar with my mum at the time. I hadn't started stand up, but I was doing kids entertainment. That's how I started. I was doing kids shows, and at that stage, I remember not cancelling the shows because. And I remember turning up. This is turning up in people's houses, doing my performances, and literally going behind my box of tricks and crying. It's just horrendous time. But so I knew that I could not perform when I was thinking, because there was a prognosis that you should have to go. They should have to go through this treatment. And I thought I can't mentally go on stage and make people laugh, really. So,
it's sort of just opposite to what you're actually feeling.
Yeah. That really is you'd have to really put on an act, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, and I just think it's too far a stretch. You're not an actor, you're a comedian, and a comedian has to put themselves on stage. You can't actually hide that. But how has she got through it?
Well, when she was younger, she was fine. I don't think we didn't talk to her about what was going on, really. It was just having a cast on operation. It was actually tried to make it more fun about what was going on. But by then we knew that it was fine. In one sense, it wasn't. But she still had to kind of see the specialist every 3 months and have X-rays, and and then she was signed off, 4 years later, saying that's fine, go away, live your life, kind of thing. But I think now, because she's wants to go into science, into biology and cell biology and all this stuff, she kind of understands much more about what's going on. So I don't know if that puts her in a situation. I think doctors think they've got every disease under the sun, don't they, when they're training? and I'm worried that she's got my brain of being a bit more of a hypochondriac about things, and getting worried about any ache or pain or whatever. So I don't know.
And of course that's what she's studying. But how did your wife cope? Considering she'd been through a war, her brother came out on the last bus, you're a prisoner of war, basically you're a political refugee. It's quite a big move to make from your country into another country. How did she cope?
Well, I think she copes well on the surface, but I think it does take a toll. I think that her mindset, and I think she had to go at me a lot because she works so hard. And I think people from that kind of where she's come from look at us, because I come from a very kind of middle class background and have not suffered really. I mean, the different thing with the mother thing is different, but I think generally quite middle class, quite never wanting for anything really. I mean, not rich or wealthy, but never really wanting for anything. And she's come from a place where you just got to work for things. You can't. So she sees me sometimes, and I sometimes think I'm working really hard, but in comparison, I'm not. So I think she puts everything into her work and works, and also into the future. So she's quite how shall I put this? Her scenario, she'll take situations and take them into the worst scenario possible.
Right.
So instead of saying, "Oh, everything's going to be all right," like I do, it's fine,
Yeah.
don't worry about it. She'll think, "Oh, this happens. What if this happens?" She's quite what's the word? I'll think of the word in a minute.
It's not quite apocalyptic, but it's
Yeah.
on that. You've got to know that these things can happen in your life. I know that feeling. Tell her I do understand that, because I think it's the part of the mentality if you come from Eastern Europe, because you know what can happen. We've been, and I love the UK for that. We are so fortunate to be here with all everybody has problems in every country, but we are slightly separated here, and at the moment, thank God, we're still quite cushioned. But I understand why she feels like that, why she goes into that mindset. And you've got to build your safety net just in case something does go wrong, worse than it's ever been anywhere else, because that's what you bring with you. Is the psychoanthropology of where you were brought up. What do you bring with you, even though you move from one country to another? And very often, if you are a refugee, you often remember your country when it was when you left.
And that's a massive problem, I think. Not I mean, it not a problem, is that the right word? But so her country does not exist.
Yeah.
So she was brought up in Yugoslavia, which all the memories and the fact that Bosnia, Croatia, Montenegro were one country, although it was made up later on, beforehand. But the fact is that when that splits, then you've got no country really kind of to go back to. So that's a real big problem, I think. Yeah.
But I'm sure as a couple, and this is with my therapist hat on, that you are both two sides of a coin in a way. You've got that more laissez-faire attitude, and she's got that what if, what's the worst thing that can happen? And perhaps between you've created that family that actually a little bit of the recipe that can actually work.
It can, but I think any relationship, because of those extremes in a way, she'll get very kind of exasperated with the fact that I don't plan enough or whatever. So you do every so often. I think regularly one has to come together and talk these things, and if you leave it too long, sometimes they can get very hard to solve, kind of thing. So, but yes, I think she's, as long as we keep talking, it's very good at the moment. Yes,
but I do think you're quite right. Yeah, everybody, there's no perfection on this earth. Nobody's perfect. That's why we're here. That's my belief. And I tell that to all my clients, and whenever I talk to people, nobody's perfect. We're seeking perfection, but we'll never get it here. That's our job, if you like. And with couples, it is communication, as you say. What's your son like? Does he take after you or your wife?
So my son, he actually, it's funny because my daughter looks like my wife, and my son looks like me in one case, except he's got good hair. But at the moment, hopefully it skips a generation. But he's fine. He's great. He's kind of quite sporty. He's into basketball.
Great.
He's kind of I think what also was good about being with someone who's from a different culture and has a different language and everything else. So my son, actually, his first language was Serbo-Croatian. I'm Serbian, really, Montenegrin, because he actually we kind of pushed him off to his Alex's my wife's mum in Montenegro, and so he stayed there for like 6 months. So so his first language was Montenegrin, really.
Oh, fascinating.
So and also I think the kids have traveled a lot, and they've been to different places, and especially former Yugoslavia, they've been all over. So they've experienced different people, different languages, and I think that's quite important. I think so they are quite, and we live right in the centre of London. They travel on the tube and from an early age in a way. So they're quite well rounded and yeah.
Oh, excellent. So coming back to your photography, you still perform, I know that, which is great. So Steve Best, look out for Steve, anybody who's listening, but also your book.
Yeah.
You compiled. Who's on your list that you haven't done? Because you've got Alan Davis speaks very highly, Shaki Kosander. You've obviously got Dave Frank Skinner and Dave Baddiel. Who else is there that you haven't taken a photograph of on stage?
Well, because those two little books, I kind of went out of my way. Some of them, we were talking about Alexis Sale, so I'd never gig with him, but I friendly with Robin Ince, who was interviewing him at a gig one time, and I said, "Oh, can I?" So I actually went out of my way to get a few people like that. There's people like Clive Anderson and Jack D and people like that who I hadn't really gig with. So that was the problem. So now there's people like Michael McIntyre, who I actually knew quite well early on. It's very hard to get hold of him to my connections wise. So I did take a picture of him at the Comedy Store, and that's in the book, so he's on there. So, but I haven't taken a picture of Tim Minchin, who I'd like to take a picture of. Yeah, people like Ricky Gervais, actually, who wasn't really a stand-up, he was more of an actor, really. But
that's right. So he's now created his own craft of stand-up. I do remember him being interviewed with Chris Rock and somebody else at the very early stage of his stand-up career, and I do like his present stuff. I think Ricky Gervais does saved himself in my eyes. I shouldn't be too critical of stand-ups. It's such a hard task, such a hard art. But he was sitting there and I could sense his awkwardness because he hadn't done the circuit. He hadn't sort of done the ropes, as they say, to feel what it's like. But he does super well, and he's now found his way. And, you've got to take your hat off to him. He's done well. But it is, quite hard going around the circuit. Do you now have, when you use your camera, do you think, oh, I've got to capture that moment? Or what's the psychology behind it? Do you think, oh, I'd like to capture that essence of that artist?
Not necessarily of that artist, I think. I think what it is I found a way of shooting on stage that I think will be different to a photographer, because I try and shoot rather than straight on. There's very few straight on shots, because I think a photographer could come into a show, although most people wouldn't be allowed, and take pictures. And I want to get the angle where I'm the comedian taking the pictures. So I will get, I would hide in the wings of a place and shoot upwards into the light or something like that. And then I've got a lot of backstage shots. So it's not really about the person, as in if it's a famous comedian. It's more just getting a really nice shot of a moment of either this kind of interaction backstage, or the interaction with the audience on stage, or just their mannerisms on stage. So I kind of know when a joke's ended, or when the time is to click the shutter. But there are a few comedians that'd be nice to get hold of and shoot, but that's not kind of what the project is about. Documenting the comedy circuit, really. And it's never been done before in a book form, in the new book Comedians, the big art book. And that's what I really love about it, is that it's been done for theatre, been done for rock and roll, but not really for comedy, because no one's really had the access, or the being a photographer as well. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, because comedians, this is what I'm saying, they go on stage, you do your 20 minutes, half an hour, some 2 hours. But leading up to that, it is an isolated, one person comes into a venue. You might have done another gig somewhere else, and you might do two at that venue, or in the old days. And it's you. And so to be bothered with somebody else taking photographs, it wasn't totally that comfortable, was it, for performers? But, what I noticed about your work is there's something about how you, because you're an artist, because you're a stand-up, you've captured that aspect of them. So you've got Al Murray with his beard, just at that moment. So, or Alan Davis at his best, when he's smiling and less anxious. You've managed to capture people in such a good way that you could actually sort of go in deeper, as, when I, as an observer, am looking at photographs, which I love, is, to capture so much more about them. Because before people go on stage, I used to watch them. Of course I did. And they were just pacing up and down, preparing their material. So no moment is lost for a stand-up. They walk into the room, they walk into the venue, and they're looking at the audience, preparing from the side. What am I going to say? Let's make sure I don't say something in the same way somebody else has. It's not like Bob Monkhouse's jokes, that everybody shared jokes. It's quite different, but you don't want the same theme to be spoken about by four of the same comedians on stage, do you? So there's
No, totally. And I think that's the beauty of it. And my manager keeps saying, don't, because I was kind of promoting the idea of this as me being a comedian with the access. But he said, you know, they are really good photographs. Say you're a really good photographer. You know, that's the angle. You know, really big it up, because I think that because I understand what's going on. I think I know what to capture really.
exactly.
And I think when you say that you saw these people backstage, they in your head, there's a kind of, it's a film thing in your head, but to capture the moment for prosperity now is nice, I think, because the punters, the people out there, don't really know that side of it. You know it because that's been your world. But I think that's what I wanted to show more, that kind of what people are going through, and you just capture that moment in time, which is, you know, sounds arty-farty, but I think that's...
No, it doesn't, because that's what art is, isn't it? It is that snapshot. And somehow you didn't start off by thinking, I'm going to become this wonderful photographer, but your work is fantastic. There's no question. You have absolutely got something. Did you ever expect to be this person who's created these wonderful photographs?
Not really. I think it did start off as I think Bob Mills was saying, "Oh, you should do something with it." That was early on, and then as I was doing it backstage, and it was the kind of the first time when I went to this gallery, the Observatory Photography Gallery. We've got my exhibition at the moment. It was the guy, the owner there, who was a photographer, and he understood. He taught it. He was the first person in that world to say, "You've got something really special here." Not all of them, but there's some beautiful ones there. It's innate. There's something about it. We were talking about timing, and the fact that comedy and photography have got this timing, you know, and sometimes you can't teach it. I can teach someone how to do stand-up, the mechanics of it. Someone can teach you how to do photography, the mechanics of it. But there's something innate about being, I mean, I'm trying to blow my own trumpet here, but I don't want to. But there is something innate.
I'm so pleased you are blowing your own trumpet. I always tell, I know you're not my client, but I always tell my clients, you've got to blow your own trumpet, please. Because, you know, you don't need to be self-effacing when you are talented. And that talent has come from, did you expect to have this talent?
Well, that's the other thing is, you know, I talk sometimes about the fact that because I always thought myself as a stand-up, and then you pigeonhole yourself and say, well, that's all I do. But there's no reason. If you're creative, why can't you do drawing or art and photography? It's still creative. It's still part of it. That doesn't mean... And I think the artists in the bygone eras that did that, a lot of people had different things to their bow. They didn't just be a stand-up or just be an art, you know, just paint, you know. So yeah.
Are you pleased that you found this talent?
Yes, I mean, I think again, going back to my wife said, how you've got to monetize it. You've got to live. You know, I think that's the thing with the art world is, you know, I've got to a stage now where it is actually doing well. But there was a stage where the comedy circuit was kind of,
oh well, you know,
another big an hour talk, but how it kind of fell apart really. So
I know, I'm so upset by that, because for me, comedy in so many people's lives is a savior. You know, I do a stand-up comedy workshop for Brentford Football Club for men at the moment, because they have a wellness centre, and I started that. I know, me teaching it, but it's good actually. People are enjoying it. But you know, I'll show them your photos as well down there. But for you to have found this, and you're quite right, you know, everybody needs to learn that they can be funny is crucial. But you found another talent. And just go through the names of your books and where people can find it, and also your website, Steve.
Okay, very quickly then. So the first one was Comedy Snapshot, which was 2014, and then Joker Face, which is much the same. That's 2017, and this last one, Comedians, which is the fine art book in a big chunky book to put on your coffee table. And so you can all find that on my website, which is stevebest.com. Very easy.
But also, and where is your exhibition?
So the exhibition at the moment is in the Observatory Photography Gallery, which is in Marchmont Street in Russell Square, King's Cross area.
Fantastic. And I'm going to go and have a look, and your work is phenomenal. And I'm so pleased you've managed to capture some great artists. So well done, Steve. And thank you for joining me. I'm Dr. Maria Kempinska.